Hi, and welcome to episode 83 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. It's also episode 20. I can't believe I have 20 episodes on YouTube. And it's an honor and a privilege to have someone who I've worked with personally on my coaching. I have no problem people knowing that. I hope that's okay with you. But Amy Teumer is someone I've known for about a year and a half on a coaching level, but followed her on social media for a couple of years at least before that. Maybe not a couple of years, but at least another year before that, and really liked her energy and all that. She is someone who has 16 years of experience in the mental health field. She is a coach. She does telehealth. She also maybe hopefully we'll talk about her perinatal mental health stuff. Love her energy. She has helped me tremendously, and you can thank her partially for this podcast being so successful. So I put that on her. But Amy, welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I'm so excited to be here today.
I can't tell you how excited when you said yes. I'm like, it's one of those when you send out a like, hey, you want to be interviewed? And you go, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think you'd say yes. So I really appreciate it, Amy. And I put it out there. I'm not very shy as to what I do in my life. I think that's why it's, hopefully that's okay with you. But I feel like I know you. I don't really know you more than my coach, but know you from social media also. But how about you tell my audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Amy Teumer, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm located in Florida. And I've been in the field, like Steve said, for about 16 years. And I started out kind of in the trenches, like a lot of us therapists, working for different agencies and kind of bouncing around to different levels of care. So I've worked in clinics, therapeutic schools, inpatient programs, residential programs. I've worked with children, adolescents, adults. And I think that was really important in my early years as a therapist, just to get all that exposure in different environments with different populations to really see what I was interested in and the type of people that I really wanted to work with and was most effective with. So I've been in private practice now for about almost 12 years. And I initially started just kind of doing it part time. And again, I think that's very common for a lot of therapists where you're not quite ready to take that leap. So you're still working in agencies or maybe residential inpatient programs, but then doing something on the side to kind of see how that goes, testing the waters, and slowly kind of built my private practice over the years. And then finally, when I found out I was pregnant with my first daughter, made that leap to go full time into private practice. I really was hoping to find more of that balance and prevent burnout as a new mom. So that's when I decided to go into my own business.
We definitely have that in common. I have two daughters myself, so we definitely have that also in common. 12 years of private practice. You wanted to do it because you wanted more time for yourself, or you like going in the trenches. I've learned what I liked and what I didn't like to do. I don't know if that kind of influenced you going into private practice or.
Oh, absolutely. And I think after having that type of experience, you feel a lot more comfortable and confident in private practice. Whereas if you jump right into it after grad school, you don't have all that experience. So now, I mean, anyone can really walk into my practice and nothing's really going to catch me off guard or surprise me because I've had all of that exposure. And you really appreciate the private practice world where people are motivated, right, to do the work and they're there voluntarily. So it definitely has a different vibe. But, and that in combination with, like I said, being a new mom and wanting to have that work-life balance, wanting the flexibility, wanting to have agency over my schedule and my time, I think that was definitely a big force.
You've helped me also understand how to manage our time. What you talk about being in private practice, managing your time better. Is that because we're in private practice, because it's more personal, or something else? I mean, why are we able to manage our time much better in private practice?
Yeah, well, I think obviously there's a lot more freedom, flexibility being your own boss and being a business owner, right? Versus an agency or program telling you when you have to work or telling you how many people you have to work with or how to work with them. So just having that freedom is really important. And then looking at your schedule, especially as a mom of two now, and figuring out what's going to work for me, right? As far as when do I want my first client? When do I want my last client? How many days a week do I want to work? How many hours do I want to work per day? And making sure that vibes with my family and those other priorities that I have outside of work.
And that's the thing that I really stress with a lot of people is that we have a lot of other obligations in our life, and that private practice gives us that flexibility. um, Definitely like my private practice. I don't like my boss. He can be kind of a bum sometimes. He really pushes me hard. But ultimately, I think I enjoy being in private practice. And I think that what brought me to private practice is a lot of stressful events that happen in an agency work. And and for me, going to therapy was really what kind of like helped me get to that point. The question that I ask everyone in Finding Your Way Through Therapy podcast is, have you ever been in therapy yourself?
Oh, absolutely. All throughout my life. And actually started pretty young when I was a teenager. I was one of those angsty teens. I would say I was, those emo kids that, just all of my feelings, very emotional. I struggled with a lot of insecurity, anxiety, depression. And luckily, I was able to talk to my parents about it and they got me help right away. And so I think I was maybe 13 when I started therapy. And that was a very like profound thing for me. It was life changing to have someone that I could talk to, get that validation, get that support outside of friends and family. And that experience in itself, I think, really pushed me into psychology and therapy because I really enjoyed it. It really helped me. But then I started to think, hey, this might be something that I want to do when I get older.
It's interesting because usually people go into therapy and they're like, oh, that's something I would like to do when I'm older. But the one thing I've heard before, and because you've been in therapy, I just definitely want to ask you this question. Some people say, like, I listen to myself talk sometimes in therapy, and I'm like, how the hell does a person listen to us on the other side? Did you ever have that experience at any time? And how did that go for you?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes getting used to, I think, when you're in there and you start to share all these things and you're not maybe quite sure how therapy works or how the other person is receiving that information, especially as a teenager, you're a little guarded. Initially, it's hard to open up and get comfortable. Like, can I really trust this other adult? And learning that my therapist wasn't going to turn around after every session and report things to my parents. So it takes a long time to get comfortable and build that rapport. But, then you do get comfortable opening up, being vulnerable, sharing things. And I think the biggest part of therapy that is so powerful is just that validation, where someone really validates your feelings and your experiences, and you learn that emotions aren't right or wrong, good or bad, they just are. And accepting those emotions and learning how to manage them.
Well, I think about it as guarded. I mean, I'm 47 years old. I think I still am guarded in therapy. I definitely am, actually. I know that for a fact. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
break, I think. It's,
That was cool.
but at the end of the day, you said you started getting interested in therapy because of your own therapy. Were there other factors that made you interested in therapy?
Yeah, so my senior year, I actually took an AP psychology class as well. So I think that in combination with my own personal experience really got me interested. I was very artsy in high school, so I was into like photography and graphic arts. So initially I started out that route when I went to college, but I always had psychology kind of in my mind as well. So after taking a few courses, I realized that the artsy side of me was maybe more of a hobby, and I really wanted to pursue psychology more as a career. So I, fairly soon in my college career, figured that out maybe like the second semester, and then kind of switched route and decided to get my undergrad in psychology and then go on to grad school.
And where did you go for your undergrad and your grad school?
Yeah, so I went to UCF for my undergrad in psych, and then I went to Nova Southeastern for my master's. So my master's is in mental health counseling, and then I went on to get licensed. So I'm a licensed mental health counselor.
And your license in Florida?
Yeah, it's in
Okay.
Florida.
Because I know now people get licensure everywhere else. So, uh,
Oh, sure.
yeah, I'm fine with just staying in Mass. I'll be perfectly honest with you. And then basically going from art to therapy, I think that to me, sometimes art meets therapy because we have to, in psychology, there's an art to talking where when you talk about art, I imagine you, and maybe it's my own thing, I imagine you singing or I imagine you painting, but I didn't like, did you integrate some of the art practices, for lack of a better word, to your um, work as a therapist, or how did you manage that?
Oh, absolutely. And I still do to this day. And one of the residential programs I worked at, we actually had like certified art therapists, and I worked very closely with them, just learning different ways to incorporate art. So whether that's, poetry, music, photography, graphics. I mean, there's so many different ways to incorporate art in therapy. And so that's still something that I do today because I think a lot of people connect with art and expressing themselves, and it feels less threatening, right, to maybe draw a picture or write a song or a poem about how you're feeling versus just talking about it, especially with some of my younger clients. I think that helps them kind of break through that resistance they have to therapy.
And I think that that's the good way to do it. I maybe, maybe I can draw a picture next time I go to therapy because that will help. But I also think that art therapy in general, or expressive therapy, as I learned to say it now, really helps individuals just get out of their shell. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a good way to do it. Is there other techniques that you use as a therapist slash coach to help people get out of their shell? Maybe their stuck points.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times it is just building that relationship and that rapport. So just being patient with the process and meeting people where they're at versus like forcing them to open up in that first or second session. So sometimes we might just work on rapport building, right? And just getting them comfortable and helping them learn the process of therapy. I think a lot of people come in and they're intimidated. They're like, I don't know how to do therapy, right? So just using humor and kind of levity and allowing them to get comfortable in the process first and letting them know there's no judgment, there's no like time frame, there's no pressure that they have to open up and identify everything right away.
And when you go to your therapy, you sometimes become a coach, and I know that was one of the transitions that you did.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we know each other.
Yeah.
Let's maybe start off, because a lot of people sometimes mistaken therapy and coaching as the same.
Mm-hmm.
I've said it. I've had a few guests who are coaches, and I said, "How do you explain that to people?" So I'd like to hear your explanation as to how the difference is from a therapist versus a coach.
No, absolutely. And I'm sure there are a lot of different ways that you can describe it. But with coaching, obviously it's less clinical. So you're not going to be diagnosing and getting into very like heavy clinical topics, like trauma or severe depression. Obviously, if someone is really struggling with just like basic levels of functioning, therapy probably is a better place to start than coaching. Coaching to me is more like action oriented. So we're not going to sit there and process your childhood or your trauma. We're focused more on like what's happening right now in your life and what direction do you want to head in. So identifying, goals, priorities, values, really looking at what is not working, like what are some of the challenges or obstacles that are getting in the way, what is working, and then developing a really concrete action plan. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. They have these like broad, abstract ideas or goals that sound great. It's like, oh, I want to do more self care. I want to be less anxious, or, I want to have more balance in my life. I want to be a better mom. Well, what does that mean? Right. I think a lot of people just get stuck with that abstract idea and they don't know how to break it down to something that can actually be implemented in their life, that's time oriented, and that's realistic, right? That's the other piece of it. I think often we have these unrealistic expectations, so we kind of set ourselves up for failure and self-sabotage with that. So really helping people identify goals, right? And make sure it matches the values and priorities they have in their life, and really auditing how they're spending their time and energy, because sometimes when you look at that, it doesn't match up what you want, right? And that's where the disconnect is. And so it's very targeted, with the goal setting. Accountability is a huge piece of it as well. I think sometimes with coaching, you have more freedom and flexibility, with the techniques and things that you can incorporate. Obviously, sometimes you can be a little more confrontational, right? Versus like, let's spend a year processing this one thing. It's like, okay, what are you going to do about it right now? Right.
Right.
So it's very kind of in the moment. Obviously, there are a lot of great advantages as far as accessibility. So with my therapist license, I'm only able to work with people in the state of Florida. With coaching, I can work with people all over the world. You don't have those same restrictions or regulations that you would with your license. So I think there's a lot of great benefits to it. And, initially when I got into coaching, it was kind of right in the midst of the pandemic. And like a lot of therapists, I was just feeling really burnt out. My caseload was increasing to the point where I was seeing 35, 40 clients a week. And it was just a lot. You're trying to help everyone and just keep taking more and more on. And then in my own personal life, started to feel just really burnt out and overwhelmed. I wasn't excited to get out of bed and start my work day, you just start to kind of dread work, and just had a lot of signs that something wasn't working, that
Right.
something had changed. And then at the same time, I had people reaching out to me from my Instagram following, other therapists, saying, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. It's really, interesting the way that you've built your practice, the way that you market things. It seems like you have it figured out. Have you ever thought about coaching?" So that kind of at the same time got me to start to look into that. Well, what would that look like as a therapist? How would I incorporate that or kind of make that part of the work that I do, and got me really excited about it.
I think there's a lot of people who go into coaching because it is exciting and it's a change. But when you have 30 to 40 clients a week, how do you manage the stress for any human being to do that during a pandemic? I mean, it's just very tough in general. Did you find yourself working because you wanted to stay busy? Did you end up working more because the demand was there or something else?
Yeah, I think all of the above. It's hard as a therapist to turn clients away. And I think in the last couple of years, I've gotten really good at setting boundaries and prioritizing my own self care and mental health. And that really got my attention. When I was at that point of burnout and overwhelm, I said something has to change. So incorporating coaching to have that balance, really lightening my clinical caseload and looking at my schedule and prioritizing the things that fill up my cup and make me feel good. Looking at the type of clients I was working with and making sure that it was more of my ideal client versus just taking on everyone because I can, having more of a niche or specialization. So I think all those things kind of played into having that healthier balance.
And when you talk about ideal coaching, the thing that comes to mind for me is you have a lot of different coaching programs. So,
Mm-hmm.
how about you go through some of these coaching programs and what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, it first started out with just other clinicians reaching out and wanting some help with their business and their private practice. But, different elements are involved in that. So, of course, helping them reach their business and financial goals, but at the same time, preventing burnout and incorporating
Mm-hmm.
self care and family life. So, I have a lot of clinicians that are maybe moms or parents. And so they're like, well, how do I do all the things? How do I run a successful practice? But I also want to be with my family and my children. I want to take care of myself
Right.
somehow. I want to maybe have a relationship with my spouse or my partner. I want to have friends. Like, how do I do all the things? So then that kind of expanded to my Mom Boss Life Academy, which essentially it's business coaching, but also life coaching kind of combined, where other moms that are trying to run businesses need that help balancing it all. So I have a special track just for those mom bosses that really need that guidance in all those different buckets and finding that balance. And then also I found that there are some clients that maybe have specific goals or certain habits that they want to incorporate, and it really is more of like life coaching, habit coaching, or mindset coaching. So it's not so much clinical, right? It's really more they need that action planning, goal setting, accountability, but it's very targeted to those behaviors and those goals, whether it's certain behaviors or mindset changes they need to make. So that was another aspect that I added to my coaching as well. So when someone comes in, kind of assessing which coaching program they would fit best with.
And it's always hard to find the one that works for you. So, how do you decipher which one the person goes into?
Yeah, so I'll have them come in, do some initial paperwork as far as what they're looking for and their goals, and then we'll have a consult and talk through it together. And by the end of the meeting, typically have a general sense of what's going to work best for them. And then we talk through that together and set up a plan.
Okay. Well, I know that definitely that we all have different needs and the mindfulness and moving forward and our own social life. I think that there's a lot of stuff that goes with that. I think that it's also about burnout. I mean, one of the things that I found myself and other people who work in our field when the pandemic started really affecting a whole lot of people, closing schools and stuff like that. Therapists ended up being, and I'm maybe talking only for present company, but I think for a majority of them, they had family obligations, whether it is mom, dad, brother, sister, daughter, son, what have you. And then you had the obligations of work, and then you had where the hell am I going to go? Because at one point we couldn't even leave our house.
Mm.
And for me, the burnout really occurred, and thank burnout for this podcast too. But I ended up seeing the same number of people, and I just like I didn't deal with my own stuff, so
Mhm.
I ended up being a little burnt out. I felt like it was as I've discovered with my therapist, a trauma response to stay busy because I didn't want to deal with the stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but how do you prevent burnout, not only in for therapists obviously, but for mom bosses you talked about, and other people in general, because it is a very um, tight rope to run.
Oh, absolutely. And I always say burnout prevention is a lot easier than burnout recovery, right? So if you can be preventative and intentional and make sure you're constantly checking in with yourself to prevent that from happening, that's going to be a lot easier than having to recover from it because it takes a really long time when you've had prolonged burnout, which so many clinicians have been in that position, right? It's like years and years of burnout. And then they're like, okay, something's got to change. So the more preventative that you can be, the better. But definitely, looking at how are you taking care of yourself. We're in a, industry that has a high burnout rate because we are giving so much of ourselves to other people, sitting and listening to people all day and their issues and being so invested in that. Often our own needs and our own self-care and mental health gets lost in that. So I think really prioritizing that and making that a non-negotiable, having carved out self-care time. I'm a huge advocate for therapists and therapy. I really think that if you're a therapist, you should be in therapy, or having some type of support system, whether it's business coaching, life coaching, any other support that you can have is going to be so important to prevent that burnout so that you can participate in all those other elements in your life and not feel that sense of dread.
And I think that when you talk about therapists being in therapy, I'm 100% behind it. I think that when I was in undergrad, we learned about it through the psychoanalytic history, where basically you had to have your own psychoanalytic sessions in order to become a psychoanalytic therapist. And in time, it was seen, we pushed against Freud, we pushed against a lot of these psychoanalytic behavior therapists or theoretic people, and we kind of run away from being in therapy ourselves. And I think that with time, we've really changed a way to get back into therapy. I frankly could not do my job if I wasn't in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get through to someone with that? Because I think that it's hard for some therapists to say, well, no, I'm a therapist. And this is maybe my own projection, I'll guess, but I've seen another therapist. I'm a therapist. I got to handle my own stuff. Right. And at the end of the day, I go back to a meme I once saw is like, we're all as screwed up as any other human being. We're just screwed up differently. But how do we tell therapists to really get into not only therapy, coaching, or whatever to find a balance in their life?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of my biggest missions on social media, I'm sure you're aware of, is constantly trying to break down that stigma and talk about the fact that I'm a therapist and I've been in therapy all throughout my life for different reasons. But we're human, right? And we have our own stuff, our own trauma, our own lived experience, our own daily struggles. And we need a support for that. We need someone to talk through our own stuff and have that awareness and also to understand what it's like to be on the other side of therapy.
Right.
How can we be a good therapist if we don't know what it's like to be a client and to be vulnerable and to have that experience? I think that can be very humbling and grounding to go in as a client, to have to find your own therapist and start, that process of building a relationship with a therapist and trusting a therapist and opening up to a therapist and incorporating those elements in your own life. I think that will make you a much better therapist. So I think just talking about, your own experience and promoting that to anyone that will listen, right? On any platform that you have, that's how we break down that stigma and normalize it, right? And I think sometimes there is this idea that we're therapists or coaches and we have it all figured out, that we're perfect, our lives are perfect. And that's not the case, right? Like that's like the biggest running joke of all. We're all human, we all have our own struggles, and we all need help.
And I remind people, I have my own history. Amy has her own history. Everyone has their own history. And that brought them to XYZ or ABC or whatever letters you want to choose. Doesn't matter. And we all have that unique story. So that doesn't make us more screwed up, less screwed up. It just makes us different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a way of talking about it. The other part that I do is, I'm hoping that this podcast helps not only people who are listening who want to go to therapy, but therapists who might be listening to go to their own therapy, because I think it's so important. I cannot thank enough the 3 or 4 therapists that I've had in my life to get me to the point where I'm at today, which I'm very happy about. But at the same time, I go to therapy every 3 weeks and it's not going to stop. And I don't see an end to it. And that's okay. But for some people, that's kind of imposing. How do we suggest to someone that, therapy is not a 6 week program or 12-week program?
Yeah, I really think, it can be lifelong. There's always something to talk about, there's always something to process or work on, even if you're just maintaining certain things in your life and having that support system, that accountability. I just don't think you can replace that. And you can always, like you said, kind of spread sessions out or have it more as needed, but to still have that connection to therapy and have that resource available. I think that's so important. And I don't ever see myself not going to therapy.
Right. I don't see myself ever stopping therapy, frankly, and that's not a bad thing. And maybe, in time, I want to work on different things and want to change therapists, and maybe the same therapist can do it. But I also say people just go that. And one of my clients choked around and asked me, "Who's your therapist?" I'm going to go ask them who their therapist is. And I'm going to get to the top of the food chain. And I always thought that was a funny line.
Yeah, I heard something about like your grand therapist or great grand therapist. So it's like, your therapist. And it's always interesting to think about it that way, where it's like, what's your therapist telling you? And what's your therapist telling you? And, it's always interesting to see that chain of command.
I, I, I always think that eventually we'll get to somewhere where it rotates back to someone else.
It's a big circle, right?
It's a big circle, in my opinion. But the one thing that you mentioned there, right before that, is your social media. That's how I
Mhm.
met you. Your social media is amazing. You decided to be very vulnerable and authentic in your social media. Talk about your family. Talk about a lot of different things. How did you get to that point to say, look, I'm going to just be myself on social media. I'm not going to just put like, unicorns and butterflies, and I'm not against unicorns and butterflies. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just
Mhm.
saying not just doing that, because sometimes, that's the tendency for some of the social media stuff that therapists do.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I just got to that point, like you said, where I just was ready to be real and authentic. And I think that's how you reach people and connect, to break down that stigma, to normalize it, to not just show up and talk in clinical terms, but to also say, hey, I'm a human being. And I've had my own struggles and I go to therapy. And this is how I try to, figure things out in my own life or find that balance or take care of myself. And I think that's a lot more motivating than just showing up and not being connected to your audience in that way. So it started out where I just had a small following and it was just a lot of other therapists and clinicians. And it was more just like networking. And I just figured I had to have some presence. And then it just started growing. And, like you, I would experiment with different things to see what got the most engagement. And it really was when I was showing up authentically as myself and sharing some of that lived experience where people were really connecting and engaging. And I was seeing that response. And that's ultimately my goal, right? To break down that stigma, to connect with people, to promote mental health awareness. And that's what started happening. So I've just stuck with that this whole time. And I'm seeing more and more therapists kind of breaking out of their shell and showing up more authentically. And I think that's a great thing.
The other part that I love about your social media is that you talked about it in this interview, obviously, but your emphasis of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
and you share that a lot on social media. Are you doing that for any particular reason, like breaking the stigma, breaking the barrier, or something else?
Well, I think all of that, but also accountability, believe it or not. A lot of it is
I
for
thought
myself.
so.
Sorry, followers, but a lot of it is really for me because I know if I don't post my 5 a.m. workout or my mental health walk, I like to call it, like, that's like on me. And then I'm going to start to feel that. And it's funny, I even have followers that will start to reach out and be like, hey, is everything okay? If I'm not on there for a couple of days, like posting about my self care. So a lot of it really is for me to almost like have that documentation and to be accountable for the things that I'm doing for myself.
I, 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 I tend to agree a lot with that, and you certainly have helped me in regards to that. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I also find is that you'll always be surprised what people get engaged with. So I did a social media post, I think in December, um, that was like, here are three pairs of glasses that I'm looking at. And that got a lot of engagement, a ton of engagement in regards to what I look like. And then people like, oh, you look too serious in your picture and all that. Do you find there's anything in particular that really like you go, wait a minute, that got that much engagement? Is there something that like that
Yeah,
happens to?
it is surprising because you'll have certain like reels or posts you put a lot of thought into, and you're like, oh, this is going to be great, and you're like planning it, and then it's like, it kind of flops. Where other times it's just like very like sporadic in the moment. You get inspired, or you just had a session and you thought about some quote or some message that you want to put out there, and you just jump on and do that real quick, and then you get a really high response. So sometimes it's just that in the moment stuff that you don't have to plan for or think about, that people respond to, because then you're more authentic too. You're more real when you just kind of show up and say, hey, was thinking about this. There's something that I just did in my life, and people really connect with that.
I have a little pad here. Whenever I like, one of the things that I've learned to do is in therapy, sometimes people are like, oh, that was really good. And I don't know if I'm breaking a wall here, but I'm sure that happens to other therapists. That's great. What the hell did I just say?
Yes.
Uh,
I can
and
write it down with that.
I love like people like, oh, you know what you said last week? That was amazing. Great. Can you tell me what I said last week? Because that'd be great. And what I've done is now I've taken a pad and like, oh, that was good. All right, let me write it down. And what I do is sometimes I use it in my social media posts as a way to kind of like connect with people. And like you said, sometimes, you're like, oh, this one was really thoughtful and there's no engagement. There's another one that's really thoughtful. It gets a ton of engagement. Um, and, reminding myself that the worst they can do is, I'm authentic. So what do I have to lose?
Absolutely. People can take it or leave it, right? And recognizing that you might not be for everyone, and that's okay. That's not my goal. My goal is to reach the right people and hopefully bring some meaningful content to the right audience.
It took me a while in my career to figure out I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I mean, I'm so freaking adorable. I thought everyone would like me, but hey, that's not how it works.
You're lost.
But I think that that's where, it's good to have like connections on social media. Like you, I've met a lot of people through social media that are either therapists and what have you. Do you feel like that connection with other therapists during I talk about the pandemic, but at other moments really help you also kind of like feed your soul?
Oh, absolutely. I've met so many amazing clinicians through social media. I started some even consult groups and support groups, and a huge referral base too. And that's where I find a lot of great referrals. If I'm looking for someone in a different state, across the country, that maybe has a certain specialization, I think social media can be a great outlet for that.
And so, where are we going to find you on social media? I know, but I'm just asking for my audience.
Yes, so I'm definitely on Instagram, just Amy Teumer. I have a TikTok as well, Amy Teumer, and Facebook. So those are my three main platforms.
And you have a website also.
Yes, so it's just amytimercounseling.com.
Um, as we wrap up here, I was going to ask you, can people reach you through those platforms first of all? That would be my first thing.
Oh, yes.
When you are done with this interview, is it self-care time? Is it going to take care of the family? Is it another session? What goes on with Amy's life after this?
Yeah, it's self-care time. I actually have some workout time planned after this.
Well, no one's going to see this because they were recording on a different date and the day it's going to be there. But I guess that on that Wednesday, when that's released on January 11th, maybe they will see your workout video or what you did for self-care that day. So, Amy, I can't thank you enough for coming on to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Thank you so much. And I know I'll see you again soon. And I hope people go check out your stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.